Cultures of the mountains and the sea. Setting the stage. In ancient times, Greece was not a united country. It was a collection of separate lands where Greek-speaking people lived. By 3000 BCE, the Minoans lived in a large Greek island called Crete. The Minoans created an elegant civilization that had great power in the Mediterranean world. At the same time, people from the plains along the Black Sea and the Anatolia migrated and settled into mainland Greece. Geography shapes Greek life. Ancient Greece consisted mainly of mountainous peninsula jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. It also included 2,000 islands in the Aegean and the Ionian Seas. Lands on the eastern edge of the Aegeans were also part of ancient Greece. See the map on page 121. The region's physical geography directly shaped Greeks' traditions and customs. The sea. The sea shaped Greek civilization just as rivers shaped the ancient civilizations of Egypt, the Fertile Crescent, India, and China. In one sense, the Greeks did not live on the land, but around the sea. Greeks rarely had to travel more than 85 miles to reach the coastline. The Aegean Sea, the Ionic Sea, and the neighboring Black Sea were important transportation routes for the Greek people. These seaways linked most parts of Greece. As Greeks became still skilled sailors, sea travel connected Greece with other societies. Sea travel and sea trade were also important because Greece lacked natural resources such as timber, precious metal, and usable farmland. The land. Rugged mountains covered three-fourths of ancient Greece. The mountain chains ran mainly from the northwest to the southwest along the Balkan Peninsula. Mountains divided the land into a number of different regions. This significantly influenced Greek political life. Instead of a single government, the Greeks developed small, independent communities within each little valley and its surrounding mountains. Most Greeks gave their loyalty to these local communities. In ancient times, the uneven terrain also made transportation difficult. Of the few roads that existed, most were little more than dirt paths. It often took travelers several days to complete a journey that might just take a few hours today. Much of the land itself was stony, and only small parts of it was arable or suited for farming. Tiny but fertile valleys covered about 1/4 of Greece. The small streams that watered these valleys were not suitable for large-scale irrigation projects. With so little fertile farmland or fresh water for irrigation, Greece was never able to support a large population. Historians estimate that no more than a few million people lived in ancient Greece at a given time. Even this small population could not expect the land to support a life of luxury. A desire for more living space, grassland for raising livestock, and adequate farmland may have been the factors that motivated the Greeks to seek new sites for colonization. The climate. The climate was the third most important or more important influence on Greek civilization. Greece had a varied climate with temperatures averaging 48 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter and 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. In ancient times, these moderate temperatures supported an outdoor life for many Greek citizens. Men spent much of their leisure time at outdoor public events. They often discussed public issues, exchanged news, and took part in active civic life. Mycenaean civilization develops. As in chapter 3 explained, a large wave of Indo-Europeans migrated from the Eurasian steppes into Europe to India and southwest Asia. Some of these people had settled on Greek mainland around 2000 BCE. They later known as Mycenaeans. The name came from the leading city, Mycenae. Mycenae was located in southern Greece on a steep rocky ridge surrounded by a protective wall more than 20 feet thick. The fortified city of Mycenae could withstand almost any attack, for Mycenaeans, a warrior king, ruled the surrounding villages and farms. Strong rulers controlled areas around other Mykenaean cities such as Tyrannus and Athens. These kings dominated Greece from around 1600 to 1100 BCE. Contact with Minoans. Sometime after 1500 BCE, through either trade or war, the Mykenaeans came into contact with the Minoan civilization. From their contact with Minoans, the Mykenaeans saw the value of seaborne trade. Mykenaean traders soon sailed through the eastern Mediterranean, making stops at the Aegean Islands and coastal towns of Anatolia and the ports of Syria, Egypt, Italy, and Crete. The Mykenaeans also influenced the Mykenaeans in other ways. Mykenaeans adapted a Minoan writing system to the Greek language, decorated their vases with Minoan designs. Minoan influenced culture of the Mykenaean formed the core of Greek's religious practiced art, politics, literature. Indeed, Western civilization has its root in the Trojan War. During the 1200s BCE, the Mykenaeans fought a 10-year war against Troy, an independent trading city located in Anatolia. According to the legend, the Greek army besieged and destroyed Troy because the Trojan prince had kidnapped Helena, the beautiful wife of a Greek king. For many years, historians thought that the legendary stories told in the Trojan War were totally fictional. However, excavations conducted in northwestern Turkey during the 1870s by German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann suggested that the stories of the Trojan War might have been based on real cities, people, and events. Further archaeological studies conducted in the 20th century supported Schliemann's finding. Although the exact nature of the Trojan War remains unclear, this attack on Troy was almost certainly one of the last Mykenaean battle campaigns. Greek culture declines under the Dorians. Not long after the Trojan War, Mykenaean civilization collapsed. Around 1200 BCE, sea raiders attacked and burned many Mykenaean cities. According to tradition, a new group of people, the Dorians, moved into the war-torn countryside. Dorians spoke a dialect of Greeks, but may have been very distant relatives of the Bronze Age Greeks. The Dorians were far less advanced than the Mykenaeans. The economy collapsed and trade eventually came to a standstill soon after their arrival. Most importantly, Greeks appear to have temporarily lost the art of writing during the Dorian Age. They were only texting. No written records existed for 400 years periods between 1150 and 750 BCE. As a result, little is known about the period of Greek history. Epics of Homer. Lacking writing, the Greeks at this time learned about the history through the spoken word. According to tradition, the greatest storyteller was a blind man named Homer. Little is known about his personal life. Some historians believe Homer composed his epic narrative poems celebrating heroic deeds sometime between 750 and 700 BCE. The Trojan War forms the backdrop of one of Homer's greatest epic poem, known as the Iliad. The heroes of the Iliad are warriors, a fierce Greek Achilles and his courageous and noble Hector in Troy. In the following dramatic script, Hector's wife begs him not to fight Achilles. "My dear husband, your warlike spirit will be your death. You are not compassionate for your infant child, for me as for me, your sad wife. Before long I will be your widow. As for me, it will be better if I'm to lose you and to be buried in the ground." Great Hector replied, "Wife, all this concerns me too, but I'd be disgraced, dreadfully shamed, if I should sling away from this war like a coward. For I've learned always to be brave and to fight alongside Trojans at the front, striving to win great fame for my father and for myself." Homer, the Iliad. Hector's response to his wives gives some insight to the Greek heroic ideal, or arte. meaning virtue and excellence. A Greek could display this ideal to the battlefield in combat or the athletic contest when playing in the field. Greeks created myths. The Greek developed a rich set of myths, traditional stories about the gods, the work of Homer and other epic, theurgy by Hesiod, and source of Greek mythology. Through the myths, Greeks sought to understand the mysteries of nature and the power of human compassion. Myths explained the changing of the seasons, for example. Greeks attributed human qualities such as love, hate, jealousy to their gods. The gods quarreled and competed with one another constantly. However, unlike humans, they lived forever. Zeus, the ruler of the gods, lived on Mount Olympus with his wife Hera. Hera was often very jealous of Zeus' relationship with other women. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was Zeus' daughter and his favorite child. The Greeks thought of Athena as a guardian of cities, especially of Athens, that was named in her honor. You will learn more about Athens in other cities in section 2. Warring city-states. Setting the stage. During the Dorian period, Greek civilization experienced decline. However, two things changed life in Greece. First, Dorians and Mykenaeans alike began to identify less with the culture of their ancestors and more with local cultures they've lived. Secondly, by the end of this period, the method of governing areas had changed from tribal or clan control to more formal governments, the city-states. Rule and order in Greek city-states. By 750 BCE, the city-state or polis was the fundamental political unit in ancient Greece. The polis was made up of a city and its surrounding countryside, which included numerous villages. Most city-states controlled between 50 and 500 square miles of territory. They were often home to fewer than 10,000 citizens. At the agora or marketplace, or on the fortified hilltop called Acropolis, citizens gathered to discuss city government. Greek political structures. Greek city-states had many different forms of government. See the chart on page 128. In some, a single person called a king ruled a government called a monarchy. Others adopted an aristocracy, a government ruled by a small group of noble, land-owning families. These rich families often gained political powers after serving in the king's military cavalry. Later, as trade expanded, a new class of wealthy merchants, artisans, emerged in some cities. When these groups became dissatisfied with their aristocratic rule, they sometimes took power to share with the nobility. They formed oligarchies, a government ruled by very few and powerful people. Tyrants seize power. In many city-states, repeated clashes occurred between the rulers and the common people. Powerful individuals, usually nobles or other wealthy citizens, sometimes seized control of the government by appealing to the common people for support. These rulers are called tyrants. Unlike today, tyrants generally were not considered harsh or cruel. Rather, they were looked upon as leaders who would work for the interest of the ordinary people. Once in power, for example, tyrants often set up building programs to provide jobs and housing for their supporters. Athens builds limited democracy. The idea of representative government also began to take root in some city-states, particularly in Athens. Like other city-states, Athens went through power struggles between the poor and the rich. However, Athenians avoided major political upheavals by making timely reforms. Athenian reformers moved toward democracy, rule by the people. In Athens, citizens participated directly in political decision-making. Building democracy. The first step toward democracy came when a nobleman named Draco took power. In 621 BCE, Draco developed a legal code based on the idea that all Athenians, rich or poor, were equal under the law. Draco's codes dealt very harshly with criminals, making death a punishment for practically every crime. It also upheld such practices as debt slavery, in which debtors worked as slaves to repay their debt. More far-fetching democratic reforms were introduced by Solon, who came to power in 594 BCE. Stating that no citizen should own another citizen, Solon outlawed debt slavery. He organized all Athenian citizens into 4 social classes according to their wealth. Only members of the top 3 classes could hold political office. However, all citizens, regardless of class, could participate in Athenian assembly. Solon also introduced a legal concept that any citizen could bring charges against wrongdoers and social studies teachers. Around 500 BCE, the Athenian leader Cleisthenes introduced further reforms. He broke up the power of the nobility by organizing citizens into 10 groups based on where they lived rather than on their wealth. He also increased the power of the assembly by allowing all citizens to submit laws for debate and passage. Cleisthenes then created a council of 500. This body proposed laws and counseled the assembly. Council members were chosen by lot or at random. The reforms of Cleisthenes allowed Athenian citizens to participate in a limited democracy. However, citizenship was restricted to a relatively small group of people, of Athenians. Only free adult male property owners born in Athens were considered citizens. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from citizenship and had very few rights. Athenian education. For the most part, only the sons of the wealthy families received formal education. Schooling began around the age of 7 and largely prepared the boys to be good citizens. They studied reading, grammar, poetry, history, mathematics, and also music. Because citizens were expected to debate issues in the assembly, boys also received training in logic and public speaking. Since the Greeks believed that it was important to train and develop the body, part of each day was spent on athletic activities. They got older. Boys went to military school to help prepare them for another important duty of citizenship, defending Athens. Athenian girls did not attend school. Rather, they were educated at home by their mothers and other female members of the household. They learned about child rearing, weaving clothes, preparing meals, managing the household, and other skills, and helped them become good wives and mothers. Some women were able to take their education further and learned how to read and write. And a few even became accomplished writers, even though most women had very little to do with Athenian life outside the boundaries of family and the home. Sparta built a military state. Located in the southern part of Greece, known as Peloponnesus, Sparta was nearly cut off from the rest of Greece by the Gulf of Corinth. See map page 121. In outlook and value, Sparta contrasted sharply with the other city-states. Athens in particular, instead of a democracy, Sparta built itself into a military state. Sparta dominates Messenians. Around 725 BCE, Sparta conquered the neighboring regions of Messenia and took over the land. The Messenians became Helots. Helots are peasants forced to stay on the land they worked. Each year, the Spartans demanded half of the Helots' crops. In around 650 BCE, the Messenians, resentful of the Spartans' harsh rule, revolted. The Spartans, who were outnumbered 8-1, just barely put down the revolt. Shocked at their own vulnerability, they dedicated themselves to making Sparta a strong city-state. Sparta's government and society. Spartan government had several branches. An assembly, which was composed of all Spartan citizens, elected officials, and voted on major issues. The Council of Elders, made up of 30 old citizens, proposed laws on which the assembly then voted. 5 elected officials carried out the laws and that were passed by the assembly. These men also controlled the education, prosecuted court cases. In addition, 2 kings ruled Sparta's military forces. The Spartan social order consisted of several groups. The first were citizens descended from the original inhabitants of the region. This group included the ruling family who owned the land. The second group, non-citizens, were free, worked in commerce and industry. The Helots, at the bottom of Spartan society, were little better than slaves. They worked in the fields or as house servants. Spartan daily life. From around 600 to about 371 BC, Sparta had the most powerful army in Greece. However, the Spartan people paid a high price for their military supremacy. All forms of individual expression were discouraged. As a result, the Spartans did not value the arts, literature, or other artistic and intellectual pursuits. Spartans valued duty, strength, and discipline over freedom, individuality, beauty, and learning. Since men were expected to serve in the army until the age of 60, the daily life centered on military training. Boys left at home when they were 7, moved into army barracks, where they stayed until they reached the age of 30. They spent their days marching, exercising, and fighting. They undertook these activities in all weather, wearing only light tunics and no shoes. At night, they only slept in blankets, with no blankets and hard benches. Their daily diet consisted of little more than a bowl of black coarse porridge. Those who were not satisfied were encouraged to steal food. Such training produced tough, resourceful soldiers. Spartan girls also led hardy lives. They received some military training. They also ran, wrestled, and played sports. Like boys, girls were taught to put service to Sparta above everything else, even a love of family. A legend says that Spartan women told their husbands and sons going to war to come back with your shield or on it. As adults, Spartan women had considerable freedoms, especially in running the family estates when the husbands were in active military service. Such freedom surprised men from other Greek city-states. This was particularly true for Athens, where women were expected to remain out of sight and quietly raise awesome children. The Persian Wars. Danger of the Helots' revolt moved or led Sparta to become a military state. Struggles between the rich and the poor led Athens to become a democracy. The greatest danger of them all, the invasion by the Persian armies, moved both Sparta and Athens alike to take their greatest glory. A new kind of army emerges. During the Doric Age, only the rich could afford bronze spears, shields, breastplates, and chariots. Thus only the rich served in the armies. Iron later replaced bronze in the manufacturing of weapons. Harder than bronze, iron was also more common and therefore cheaper. Soon ordinary citizens could afford to arm and defend themselves. The shift from bronze to the iron weapons made possible a new kind of army composed not only of the rich, but also of merchants, artisans, and small landowners. The foot soldiers of this army, called the hoplites, stood side by side, each holding a spear in one hand and a shield in the other. This fearsome formation, the phalanx, became the most powerful fighting force in the ancient world. The battle at Marathon. The Persian Wars between Greece and Persian Empire began in Ionia, on the coast of Anatolia. See map on page 132. Greeks had long been settled there, but around 546 BCE, the Persians conquered the area. And when the Ionic Greeks revolted, Athenians sent ships and soldiers to their aid. The Persian king Darius the Great defeated the rebels and then vowed to destroy Athenia in revenge. In 490 BCE, the Persian fleet, carrying 25,000 men across the Aegean Sea, landed northeast of Athens in a plain called Marathon. There, 10,000 Athenians, neatly arranged in phalanx, waited for them. Vastly outnumbered, the Greek soldiers charged. The Persians, who wore only light armor and lacked training in the kind of land combat, were no match for the disciplined Greek phalanx. After several hours, the Persians fled the battlefield. The Persians had lost more than 6,000 men. In contrast, the Athenians' casualties numbered fewer than 200. Philippides brings good news. Though the Athenian won the battle, the city now stood defenseless. According to tradition, the army leaders chose a young runner named Philippides to race back to Athens. He brought the news of the Persian defeat so that Athenians did not give up the city without a fight. Dashing the 26 miles from Marathon to Athens, Philippides delivered his message: "Rejoice, we conquered." Then he collapsed and died. Moving rapidly from Marathon, the Greek army arrived in Athenia not long after. When the Persians sailed into the harbor, they found the city heavily defended. They quickly put to sea in retreat. Thermopylae and Salamis. 10 years later, in 480 BCE, Darius the Great's son's successor, Xerxes, assembled an enormous invasion force to crush Athens. The Greeks had badly divided. Some city-states agreed to fight the Persians. Others thought it wiser to let Xerxes destroy Athens and return home. Some Greeks even fought on the Persian side. Consequently, Xerxes' army met no resistance as they marched down the eastern coast of Greece. When Xerxes came to a narrow mountain pass at the Thalamedes, 7,000 Greeks, including 300 Spartans, blocked his way. Xerxes assumed that his troops would easily push the Greeks aside. However, he underestimated the fighting ability. The Greeks stopped the Persians' advance for 3 days. Only a traitors informing the Persians about a secret path around the pass ended their brave stand. Fearing defeat, the Spartans held the Persians back while the other Greek forces retreated. The Spartans' valiant sacrifice, all of them were killed, made a great impression on all the Greeks. Meanwhile, the Athenians debated how to best defend their city. Thermococles, an Athenian leader, convinced them to evacuate the city and fight the sea. They positioned their fleet in a narrow channel near the island of Salamis, a few miles south of Athens. After setting fire to Athens, Xerxes then sent his warships to block both sides or both ends of the channel. However, the channel was very narrow and the Persian ships had difficulty turning. Smaller Greek ships, armed with battling rams, attacked, puncturing the hulls of many Persian warships. Xerxes watched in horror as more than 1/3 of his fleet sank. He faced another defeat in 479 when Greeks crushed the Persian army in the Battle of Plotina. After this major setback, the Persians were always on the defensive. The following year, several Greek city-states formed an alliance called the Deliae, a league. The alliance took its name from Delius, the island on the Aegean Sea where it had its headquarters. The league members continued to press the war against Persians for several more years. In time, they drove the Persians from the territory surrounding Greece and ended the threat of further assaults. Consequences of the Persian Wars. With the Persian threat ended, all Greek city-states felt a new sense of confidence and freedom. Athens, in particular, basked in the glory of the Persian defeat. During the 470s, Athens emerged as a leader of the Delian League, which had grown to about 200 city-states. Soon thereafter, Athens began to use its power to control other league members. It moved its league headquarters to Athens and used military force against members who challenged its authority. And this time, the city-states became little more than provinces of the vast Athenian Empire. The prestige of the victory of the Persians and the wealth of the Athenian Empire set the stage for a dazzling bust of creativity in Athens. The city was entering its brief golden age.